Welcome to the National Center for Collaboration in Indigenous Education's Virtual Teacher's Resource Guide. My name is Don McCaskill, and I am the NCCIE Regional Lead for Southeastern Ontario. I've been involved in Indigenous education for 5 decades, including teaching in the Department of Indigenous Studies at Trent University for 47 years. My colleagues, Kevin FITZMAURICE and LEISA DESMOULINS, and I have prepared this Teacher's Resource Guide to assist teachers, especially teachers starting out in their careers, and non-Indigenous teachers to integrate Indigenous content into their classroom in an effective and culturally appropriate way. This guide has put together a team of educators with expertise in Indigenous education to provide teachers with the background and skills to incorporate Indigenous themes into their curriculum. It is simple to use and is meant to be a practical handbook to assist teachers utilize the NCCIE website, including the nearly 100 lesson plans included on the site.
Bonjour, Kevin FITZMAURICE and Dejnakas and Swakamak and Donjaba, Jaganash, Nuiji, Mitsimama, Anishinaabe, Nini, and Dao. For those of you that don't speak Anishinaabe, I've introduced myself as Kevin FITZMAURICE. I've said that I live in Sudbury or in Swakamak. I've also said that I'm a non-Indigenous person that walks with the Anishinaabe as an allied scholar. And so I'm also the regional lead for the NCCIE Northeastern Ontario region, and I have over 20 years experience as a faculty member in Indigenous Studies, both at Trent University, but also at the University of Sudbury in Laurentian. I'm also a graduate of Trent's Indigenous Doctoral Studies program. And so welcome, Bindigan, to the NCCIE site generally, but particularly to our virtual teacher's resource guide. It is intended to provide guidance on best practices for integrating Indigenous content into your teaching. And so we'll be walking you through a number of different lesson plans, as well as providing some helpful hints along the way. And so good luck, miigwech, and take good care.
Hello, my name is LEISA DESMOULINS. I'm a mother of 3 Anishinaabe children, and it is for them that I do this work. I'm also an associate professor in the Faculty of Education at Lakehead University in Thunder Bay, Ontario. Over the past 4 years, I've been the regional lead for the National Center for Collaboration in Indigenous Education, the NCCIE, here in Northwestern Ontario. I led an amazing team of staff and researchers, and we were guided by language speakers and elders. We worked with many Anishinaabe, Cree, and Ojibwe educators across the region who graciously offered their time and their knowledge to us. Miigwech to all of them. To begin, I'd like to introduce Elder Shirley Williams. Shirley Williams became the first Indigenous woman to achieve the rank of full professor based on traditional Indigenous knowledge from Trent University. She is an elder for the NCCIE. Shirley will open our guide in a good way with a prayer. Let's listen.
Bonjour, Megazio Nishnabé Nosen Bemudon, Beneshin do them. Minoy Konishing Medewin Bemudon, Kinomagewin, we come given Jabanaba. Geekwaj Mego, Winametma, with Sakrama Mandash Condem, with Nikiasum, Minishnabem Dash, Panegulangi go me, Manda Winishnabem young, pitch Sakramang Mandagego. Miigwech Geshamine do, Newing in the Kia sex Mandake, Mem de Gesod Nikia so wabnung, O Nikia Sageo, Megaze bombes at them a majidot, Mandasagdin in Winanen. Gay with Nikia Shawn and gave me Gachana Sageo Nikia, Wash Geshanani, but Kakanoma gong wish endiang. Minagi gon Kanagong, Mina and Dadangish dot. Gijamna do mi gacha namanage so the kya epigishmak mage anan nin gabe unang ejnakad mod. Gesu nim kibineshi babi dot modot mandan sabodot mandas sake kinage go suim neging. Kiwed nung gewed ni kya gijamna do mi gachan mi gos gewed ni kya wapshkamako. Enani bukakano magwang so we know jmiang me no wimshkoziang. Apegish kenagerinus chimshkoziang. Chimquen among chimshko among mandasa with modong anishnabe win. Mina winojmiang and sabebeshik saman peking. Memdige gejamne dog, migachen megosa, mandasa shkak mekwegi mijang. Wisamanda pim na kwang chitoanebe. Chibinakas of young didn't win aning. When is the weekend mangani sa worship modong mandasambe madzinna. Gay nui anang, wait say maxo gejamne do. Come in gong in that young wepe. Gay and then angajamne dosa, migochan megosa gay, kimi shang wines yang, with mods young, mino, we saw it young some pe, kina man peking. Kina gego gajamne dog, egwejaman, mem de gay we konoshkaman, mandas chakazoon bembedek man pinikio. Gajamne do not moshnang soos me, we nanag den mang manasa, nishnabe adsuin. Ajoin mishnang jemne do jen mishnang. 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 Miigwech. My name is Shirley Ida Williams. I am from the Bird Clan. My Anishinaabe name is the Eagle Woman. I was born and raised in Wikamakong, Manitoulin Island, and I carry the Midewin teachings in the second degree. I was asked to say a prayer. Tobacco was given to me to say the opening prayer, and which I did. It is said in my culture that when we talk to the spirit that we have to use our own language, so that's what I use. The language that I use is called Anishinaabe Mwin. We pray, we believe that we have 4 spirits that guard the universe. We think of them as the guardians of the universe. So the first one is the East, because East is where the knowledge comes from, and the light. And so we have a doorkeeper over there, which is the eagle. Eagle is the one that flies the highest. And when we pray to the eagle to carry our messages, he does carry our messages to the Creator, between us and the Creator. We go to the south, and the south is the deer, the one who taught us to be kind, the one that gave us clothing and housing and the food that we eat today. We especially also give thanksgiving to the western direction. The western direction, the one that keeps the doorway, is the thunderbird. And the thunderbird, we give thanksgiving for watering the land so that everything will grow in a good way. So we thank you for that. To the northern direction, which is the white bear, the one that gave strength and healing. We ask for healing so that we can heal one another as human beings. We also ask for strength so that we can be strong to carry our life in a good way. We especially give thanksgiving to the Mother Earth for the water. So when we drink that water, we think about our life. And we think about that mind when we drink that water to purify our mind so that we can make good decisions about our life. We also thanksgiving for the spirit that walks with us, for our bodies, so that we can walk with that spirit. The heart, so that we can love one another as human beings. Especially today, we ask the Creator to chase this great sicknesses that's upon us today in this world. And we ask for help to chase this great sickness away. And we give thanksgiving for all that's been given to us to help us, to guide us, to walk upon this earth. So we say, have mercy on us 4 times. It's really not the proper translation, but the closest that we come to is have mercy on us 4 times for the sake of 4 directions. I say, miigwech.
Bindigan, welcome to the Teacher's Resource Guide, a step-by-step handbook for teachers new to Indigenous education. Thanks for stopping by to learn more about Indigenous education. I'll be your narrator throughout this virtual Teacher's Resource Guide. This guide is produced by the NCCIE. Following the approach taken throughout the project, it uses videos. It's actually a hybrid, like a hybrid car with an engine that switches between gas and electric. It's, on one hand, a how-to handbook, and it's also a video playlist. It's set up as a book with a table of contents and chapters that build knowledge as you work through them. It's also set up as a playlist with a series of videos that you can access as you need it, just in time for learning or a refresher. However you choose to access it, this guide is housed on the NCCIE website, and it's always accessible. For a brief background, the NCCIE came about as an idea for a study when Mark DOCKSTATOR, as the president of First Nations University, asked the Elders Council for their ideas. He built on these ideas by gathering researchers from across the country to learn about Indigenous education. He gives us more background in Chapter 1. This guide was prepared as part of the knowledge mobilization work that was done across Canada during Year 4 of the NCCIE. We're grateful to the NCCIE for their support for this guide for teachers across Ontario. The purpose of the guide is to fill the gap between teachers' abilities, resources, and confidence on the one hand, and the expectations for Indigenous education in their classrooms on the other. We offer NCCIE resources to begin to bridge that gap. This guide describes a step-by-step process that allows you, as teachers, to develop your confidence and abilities, your capacities in Indigenous education. We do that through Indigenous educators' explanations and exemplars of lesson plans that you can watch, use, and share with others. Through this project, we've learned much about Indigenous education that we'll share with you as you learn from the same Indigenous educators that we met throughout the project. You can be assured that these lesson plans were developed with and within Indigenous community. This should allay any concerns that you have about bringing Indigenous resources that are appropriate and accurate into your classroom. One of the things that you'll find as your learning grows is that Indigenous pedagogies can help all students to learn. These lesson plans are designed not just for your Indigenous students, but for all students in schools across Ontario. My colleagues, Don McCaskill, the Regional Lead for Southeastern Ontario, and Kevin FITZMAURICE, the Regional Lead for Northeastern Ontario, co-developed this guide with me for teachers like you who are new to bringing Indigenous education into your classrooms. Each of us worked in collaboration with local Indigenous communities and people that we already had relationships with or that we developed relationships with. Because of these relationships to Indigenous communities and peoples, each of us approached the work for our NCCIE region differently. Don's team created a series of lesson plans with accompanying videos, and they are a holistic unit. My team created a plan for elementary students and a unit plan for secondary students. We created videos that were separate from our lesson plans because they were important to community. Kevin's team took a different approach again. His team focused on developing a video with St. David's School as an exemplar of a school that walks the walk of Indigenous education. All of the resources in this guide are accessible through the NCCIE website in the section called Teaching Resource Center, and then by typing the word Ontario into the search bar. When you do that, you'll find all of the lesson plans from Ontario, including some that we don't include in chapters 3 and 4. I encourage you to try these lesson plans out as a next level challenge once you've been guided through the lesson plans that we include here. This guide also makes direct linkages to the Ontario Ministry of Education's First Nations, Métis, and Inuit (FNMI) curricula, and the elementary and secondary curriculum guides as well. For teachers in a different region, a province or a territory from Newfoundland and Labrador or BC or anywhere in between, who want to access this guide, you'll need to adjust the lesson plans to fit your teaching contexts. You'd do that by doing two things. First, you're encouraged to contact Indigenous members of your community in your area to learn how the resource may be augmented in ways that are connected to the lands and peoples where you live. Second, by looking at the curriculum documents from your Ministry of Education and choosing the subject areas and learning objectives that you follow for your classroom teaching. You're free to adapt any of these resources, and we encourage you to do that. Dawn, Kevin, and I developed this guide in collaboration with Indigenous teachers that work in schools and boards of education in Ontario. Specifically, I'd like to acknowledge Dean Smith, Jeanette Toivonen, and Angela Fott. We're so pleased that these teachers offered their time and knowledge to work with us to create this guide and get it into your hands. Earlier, I mentioned the format of the guide as both a handbook and a playlist. The handbook is organized into 5 chapters, and I'll briefly describe those chapters now. Chapter 1 is an introduction to Root the Guide in Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing, and the NCCIE's work using this approach. Chapter 2 does a deeper dive into Indigenous education within elementary and secondary classrooms. You'll learn how to use a 4 directions education model. These 2 opening chapters introduce learners to a host of terms and protocols through a lens of Indigenous education, while aligning with the Ontario Ministry of Education documents, such as the FNMI Scope and Sequence documents for Indigenous education. With this background knowledge to provide awareness, we move into the heart of the learning. In chapters 3 and 4, 2 educators, one who is Indigenous, the other who's non-Indigenous, make things practical and hands-on. These classroom teachers walk viewers through the steps of infusing Indigenous education into their classrooms. They show how to bring Indigenous ways of knowing, being, doing, and teaching into their classrooms using a template that was developed through many iterations for the NCCIE by elders and regional leads. This is where you'll see how the 4-directional model is used to connect to Ontario Ministry of Education curricula for elementary learners in Chapter 3 and for secondary learners in Chapter 4. Chapter 5 is the final chapter. Here you'll find terms, references, and next steps. That's the whole guide in 5 chapters for teachers that are new to Indigenous education and want a step-by-step handbook to guide their classroom practices. If working through these 5 chapters will take more time or effort than you have right now, please refer to the playlists. Each one has labels and timestamps that offer you a topic or a snippet to provide you with some just-in-time professional development on Indigenous education to meet your needs at that time. Next, you'll meet Dr. Mark DOCKSTATOR. During his tenure as president of the First Nations University in Saskatchewan, Mark began this project. He had a simple aim: to learn from Indigenous educators about Indigenous education, and he got that direction from the Elders Council. He's now an associate professor at the Nccie Wenjack School at Trent University in Peterborough, Ontario. Mark talks about the history of the NCCIE. Let's listen.
Well, it's interesting to go back in time and look at the beginning or the origins of NCCIE, even where we came up with that name, the National Center for Collaboration in Indigenous Education. At the time, I was president of First Nations University, and as president, you're always looking for projects of ideas, concepts that are valuable to students, to the communities, to the university, and the larger community of universities across Canada. And one of the ideas that we were looking at and examining was the idea of Indigenous education. And so we have an Elders Council at First Nations University as well, and we were talking about different ideas. And the one idea came up with, well, why don't we just document all the thousands of stories that are going on across Canada in Indigenous communities with respect to Indigenous education. why don't we just go across Canada and put teams together that can gather the stories of what the communities are doing with respect to Indigenous education. So the concept was born. My job as president was to take that concept, develop it, and seek funding. And the proposal itself went through many different iterations before we came up with the final concept that was fundable. And the federal government, and primarily Minister Bennett and her team, were the primary team to look at this and to fund this project and take it to, past its inception, to the wonderful, great project that it is today, and to gather these stories. Fortunately, technology had evolved to the point where we could hire students to go out with their iPhones, supply the iPhones and some training, and go out and capture stories, and then build the technical infrastructure where those stories could be downloaded, put onto a website, and then shared to the many people across Canada. About 17 different national teams across Canada of researchers, primarily through various universities in Canada, go through the ethical requirements and approvals that have to be done for a project this size, both at universities and also in communities, hire the students that could go out into the communities, build that capacity for them to collect those stories, and at the same time build the infrastructure, the technical infrastructure that was needed and required in order to put all those kind of stories on a digital platform. Well, Indigenous education is about language and it's about culture. So our very first banner should have Indigenous languages built into it, and it should have our culture built into it. So if you look at NCCIE on the website and the initial banner, you will see Indigenous education in English on the right. So you'll see a scrolling bar on the left-hand side that looks at how we would describe Indigenous education from the various communities in their different languages across Canada. In the center, the logo is to represent our culture. The circle, which represents, and again, First Nations universities in the prairies, the circle is there to represent the medicine wheel concept and to look at the holistic nature of education from an Indigenous perspective. You'll see in the middle 3 flames. That was to symbolize the mind, the body, and the spirit, the 3 components of the human being that are given to us from creation. And that fire burning in the center represents a number of different things. One, the fire that burns within us, that curiosity within every individual to learn and to learn more. It also represents that fire that burns in ceremonies. For example, in teepees, at the center of the teepee, that fire is there to remind us of the fire of creation, the energy of creation, and all that flow from creation. And you'll see that circle, there is some symbols there. That came from a particular teaching of an elder from Ontario, and it's called Stones and Bones. And the idea was that our traditional ways of knowing and understanding, our Indigenous education, was disrupted through colonization. And through that process of disruption, and in many cases it being illegal, that there were those who went around and found ways around the enforcement, police and missionaries and others who did not want this to be part of the education system. And they used stones and bones that they would put on the ground and use visuals that they would create in order to teach, in order for the traditional ways of knowing and understanding to be passed on in our traditional ways through an oral tradition. And those stones and bones represent the idea that even through the dark period, that fire, that thirst for knowledge continued through to the present. Through the sacrifices of many, we have our Indigenous education system still intact today in many ways. It also represents people holding hands, perhaps, or some say it looks like a buffalo head with horns, where buffalo is the new education, and represents the idea that education brings us all the things that the buffalo used to, that is, all the things that we need to survive. So it was a lot of work went into how we represent ourselves in this project, how we ensure that it is First Nations run, First Nations controlled, First Nations operated, and we tell the stories of First Nations communities, some Indigenous peoples across Canada. It's very important to ensure that our culture is represented at the very first outset of the logo, and that our languages are well represented as well. So it's not just English, and it's not just academics, it's our languages, our culture, and the community speaking to other communities. The idea being, again, that circle of sharing that is in our logo, that our ways of knowing, our traditional ways of understanding that have been carried through from generation to generation, despite the darkness, that flame still burns bright. And this is a platform for communities to share with each other and to share with Canadian society, generally speaking, so that we all become better informed. We all become part of the dialogue, part of the discussion, which is, by definition, reconciliation. My role was basically, as president, to find a concept that resonates with students, with the university, with the larger communities, both within Saskatchewan and across Canada, to do something that will not only assist First Nations, but assist us, all citizens of Canada, to learn more about Indigenous education. To do that, as any good leader will tell you, is to come up with the concept, to get the funding, and then step aside. When you hire a bunch of wonderful people to then take that concept and put it into practice and to find ways in order to make that work. So that's the story and the origins of where it came from and how it was put together, with the concept of not only looking at it from Indigenous perspectives, but to have elders involved at the very outset. And other projects came from this. If you go to NCCIE, you'll see the elders at First Nations University. They came up with videos of Indigenous education. And the unique part about that was we let the elders be the directors of their own film. Again, Indigenous concepts of we can do these things, we are in control, we decide what happens, and from a First Nations perspective, we use that as the first point or the stepping stone for the discussion, the conversation that follows from that. Knowing that at the end of year one and into year two, that we would have the teams ready, that the infrastructure, both the ethics review, for example, and the technical platforms would all be ready to put all these stories onto the platform for everybody to share. Year three, what we do with all the information. How is it that we make this resource applicable to not only Indigenous communities, but to others as well? And of course, the discussion on reconciliation was a major discussion at the time. So year three, in the latter parts of the project, was the idea of translating or transmitting or modifying the information so that we could put it into lesson plans, for example, and those lesson plans could then be used by many others who are in the education system generally across Canada and want to know more about Indigenous perspectives of education. What's going on in the communities? What are they doing from a First Nations perspective that could be valuable to our discussions in a larger context in Canadian society and within educational institutions? And how can we integrate that into the work that we do? So NCCIE evolved and started to use the information collected and translate that into lesson guides, lesson plans, and various other tools that can be used by those who are looking to integrate more Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous ways of knowing and understanding, or community voices into the work that they do. So you'll find on NCCIE that there's access to a number of different resources, the teaching guides, the lesson plans, as well as other videos, in addition to the stories that are there. And one of the resources that you'll find very useful on NCCIE is the Virtual Teachers Resource Guide that is not only there on the site as a mechanism or as a tool to use with respect to Indigenous education, but a practical application of the information that people can have a ready resource available to them, that they can search the site, they can utilize. So in summary, a fantastic project that came about through the work of many people, that came about from a great idea that germinated and started with the elders. And I said my role was merely to take that, to evolve it to the point where we could get some funding and to get it in place to implement, and then have the team take over from there, which they've done. And the result, from many perspectives, not only mine, but I think many across Canada, have been that it's a wonderful project, a treasure, really, of information, and a wonderful resource for us to share in, to be a part of, and to continue the discussion about Indigenous education and reconciliation. So thanks very much.
Nicole Bell is an Anishinaabe Bear Clan from Kitigan-Zibi First Nation in Quebec. She's the mother of 5 boys, and she's passionate about Indigenous education, motivated by her educational experiences personally and as a mother. She works as an associate professor in the School of Education at Trent University. Nicole talks about the goal of infusing Indigenous education into the classroom. Let's listen.
Bonjour, zongde kwa Indigenous, ma kwando dem, Kitigan-Zibi and Donjaba. Hello everyone, my English name is Nicole Bell. I'm Bear Clan Anishinaabe from Kitigan-Zibi First Nation, and I'm here to share some thoughts with you that I share with my teacher candidates in the School of Education at Trent University. I'm going to be speaking to you today about Indigenous education. I'm using the same term that MCCIE uses, and in using the term Indigenous, I don't mean to negate the diversity that exists across First Nations, Métis, and Inuit nations, but rather to be inclusive of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, similarly to how NCCIE uses the term. As the mother of 5 boys who've gone through the public education system, I certainly had hopes and wishes for them in their learning. And for all Indigenous learners, I want them to be acknowledged, validated, and celebrated every day in their schools. I want them to see themselves in their schools and in their curriculum, because I know that this sense of belonging is so necessary for our Indigenous learners to first get them to attend school and then to be engaged in their learning and to realize their full potential. I want Indigenous learners to learn in ways that speak to their minds, their bodies, and their hearts and their souls, so that they can learn holistically through all parts of their being. And this is why I hold Indigenous education so important, not just for Indigenous learners, but also for all learners to learn about Indigenous peoples as well, so that we can build better relations in this country between its First Peoples and settler societies that will then in turn cause greater actions and behaviors that is necessary to repair relationships in this country between Indigenous peoples and settler societies is essential to ensure that reconciliation happens. To accomplish that reconciliation work, the Ontario Ministry of Education has an Indigenous education strategy, which you can find on the Ministry of Education website if you'd like to learn more about it. Contained within that Indigenous education strategy is the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit education policy framework, which outlines what all teachers across all grades and across all subjects are supposed to do to ensure the infusion of Indigenous education into our Ontario program. There are also a number of progress reports that have been created in response to the effectiveness of this policy that was released in 2007. You can also see those on the ministry website if you'd like to learn more. The most recent progress report outlines that we still have a lot of work to do in our education system. The ministry has also produced a set of scope and sequence documents, one for the elementary program and one for secondary. And these scope and sequence documents provide teachers with entry points so that they can make curriculum connections. So the ministry essentially takes curriculum expectations from the curriculum documents that stand out as a good entry point for teachers to infuse Indigenous knowledge into the curriculum. The release of the policy framework in 2007 also resulted in positions being made available at the board offices. They're commonly known as First Nation, Métis, and Inuit leads or consultants or Indigenous liaison officers. And these people at the board offices are excellent resources for you to access on a number of different levels. If you just want to check the appropriateness versus the appreciation of culture that you're addressing in your classroom, or if you're wanting to make community connections, they are people who should know the Indigenous peoples and community that you could bring into your classroom. So they are an excellent resource and local to you through your board office. As a new or a non-Indigenous teacher, I can appreciate how uncomfortable it may feel to think about and then do Indigenous infusion in your program. It is a lot of knowledge to know and a lot of pedagogy that can be considered as well. I just encourage you to kind of sit in your uncomfortableness. I think there's learning to be had there. I recall Elder Vera Martin telling me that on the other side of conflict is clarity. On the other side of that uncomfortableness is clarity. And so sitting within it and working through it, I think is a good strategy. I know there's a lot of fear about getting it wrong or making a mistake, and as a result, many teachers do nothing to prevent that from happening. I think doing nothing is more detrimental and that it perpetuates colonialism. And in the words of Susan Dion, she says, if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? You may notice that I'm using the word infusion and instead of integration or interchangeably with integration, and I do think there is a difference. When we talk about integration of Indigenous education, we're usually talking about adding in Indigenous content or pedagogy. I would like us to get to a place in education where we're infusing it, where it's not added in, but it more becomes just what we do inherently in education. A good strategy that you can use with your students to help alleviate the fears that I've just mentioned is to learn with your students. As a teacher, you don't have to know it all. I know we feel like we do sometimes, but we don't. And so engaging your kids in inquiry-based learning can help you to learn alongside of your students. Figure it out together. To infuse Indigenous education into your program is going to require you probably to do some homework, because to build your cultural capacity is important in order to engage your students in deep, rich, and meaningful learning. Some of the homework you can do is to get to know your local First Nation communities and urban organizations. And the NCCIE videos and resources can help you start doing that by looking at the community-based resources and videos that are on the site. You can also attend public events that are hosted by your local First Nation communities and organizations. I can't tell you how important it is to our learners when they see their teachers or their principals attending their local powwow. I've experienced it with my own kids coming up to me with their eyes as big as saucers, saying, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so is here. It so excites them, and it shows them that you're willing to come into their world and learn about them. A good place to start with increasing your cultural capacity is to integrate Indigenous content into the existing curriculum that the ministry provides you. We know that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report asks us to teach about residential schools, treaties, past and present contributions, and innovations. And so those are some good starting places for your curriculum design. Also remember that the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report also contains educational actions that are required for teachers as well. So integrating content is a great place to start. Another strategy for your integration work is to use Indigenous resources, and that's what makes the NCCIE website such a wonderful resource for you to do that work. As we move more into infusion, you can start exploring some Indigenous pedagogy. You could expand that to looking at assessment, but you got to start where you're at. So I suggest that you find a lesson on the NCCIE website that you feel comfortable with using in your classroom. And then I encourage you to strive to dig deeper as you build your cultural capacity. I suggest that you stay away from anything that is considered highly spiritual or sacred. Some of that content is contained in resources on the site, but it's coming directly from the elders and knowledge keepers themselves. So I would use their voice when wanting to share that higher level of cultural content. So it takes a bit of homework for you to know, well, what's sacred versus what's cultural. But as you explore the site, I think you'll come to learn where that line is drawn. I believe that anything you teach about Indigenous people is cultural content, because who we are as a people is embedded in everything about us. Even when you're taking a look at material culture, so the things on the outside of us that you can see, there's cultural meanings embedded in all of that. So when the TRC is asking us, for example, to teach about treaties, I don't think we can teach about treaties without speaking to the relationship that Indigenous peoples have to the land and how a worldview is informed by it. Similarly, with residential schools, we can't really understand how detrimental they were if our students don't understand the communal ways of living and connections that Indigenous peoples have across their generations, or the significance of the cutting of the hair and what that meant to our students without some knowledge of cultural practices regarding their hair. The resources and the lesson plans on the NCCIE website are incredibly important and useful to creating that culturally rich and meaningful learning in your classrooms, because they help you to get to know who we are as Indigenous peoples on the inside, our worldview that informs everything about who we are and moves beyond the material culture or what you can see on the outside. The resources on the website also bring what is called first voice into your classroom. And this really helps with ensuring that you're not culturally appropriating, because you're bringing the voices of Indigenous peoples themselves into your classroom and provides you the wonderful opportunity of learning alongside your students. The NCCIE website and how their lessons are constructed also enables you to engage all of your learners' hearts, minds, bodies, and souls in the learning process. I hope the thoughts I've shared with you today will help you in your Indigenous education work. I just encourage you to do what you expect your students to do. Start where you are and build and progress from there. In upcoming sections of the Teacher's Guide, you will be learning more about some of the things I've shared with you in more detail. I encourage you to really spend some time to explore this site. There's lots of wonderful learning there to be had for not only you, but your students as well. Miigwech.
Jennifer DOCKSTATOR has served as the National Project Director for the NCCIE for the past 4 years, since its inception. She led all of the regional teams and kept them moving in the same direction as they worked with Indigenous communities and educators. She talks about navigating the NCCIE website, particularly the lesson plans and videos section of the website. Let's listen.
Greetings, my name is Jennifer DOCKSTATOR, and I'm the Project Director for the National Center for Collaboration in Indigenous Education. NCCIE is a multi-year project that is developed into a website filled with Indigenous teaching resources for learners of all ages. The aim of the project has been to amplify community voices about the strength and diversity of Indigenous education programs and initiatives across Canada, and to connect people directly with each other to learn more about these programs and resources. We have had over 100 people across the country working on the project, with 17 regional leads who recruited students, youth, and community members to gather the information and collaborate with communities on interviews, videos, and lesson plans. NCCIE has taken an Indigenous approach to its work by taking direction from First Nation, Métis, and Inuit communities, respecting their protocols and ethics processes, and giving back to communities through the creation of teaching resources that they identify as needed and would like to develop. The project has been a capacity-building project for students, youth, and community members, providing them with experience in conducting interviews, working with technologies, following local cultural protocols, and more, all skills and knowledge that are transferable to other work and future relationships. The website is free and accessible to anyone interested in learning about Indigenous education, languages, cultures, and knowledges. Teachers, students, communities, and organizations can wander through the website and explore. The resources you find can be used in classrooms, homeschooling, and on-the-land learning. I'm happy to give you a tour of the website now, briefly reviewing where you can find different resources and information on various topics, and then spending more time in the Teaching Resource Center, where we have over 80 lesson plans and more than 40 videos that are freely available and accessible to anyone interested in incorporating Indigenous knowledge into teaching and learning. So to reach nccie.ca, you just type in nccie.ca into the search field. It will take you there. So here you are on the home page. And you have so many resources to explore here, but briefly we encourage everybody to go to the knowledge space, where you will hear elders share some of their knowledge with you. If this area is where you can explore about the variety and strength of Indigenous education initiatives and programs from across the country, and you can choose from over 600 stories to listen to people talking about the program that they run or are a part of. You will hear them talk about their perspectives on Indigenous education and what their vision is for Indigenous education. So I'm going to go right now to the Teaching Resource Center and focus our time here. In the landing page, you'll see a short intro, and we encourage you all to go here and click on the Read First button and just read through this to begin with. On this page, we're just emphasizing that the resources in the Teaching Resource Center and everywhere on nccie.ca are not one size fits all, meaning that First Peoples' cultural practices and knowledges differ from one people to the next. So we encourage you to connect with the First Nations, Métis, or Inuit communities and organizations where you live to learn about the diversity of cultures where you are. So after you read this, you can just close out, and just for background information, you can explore all of these areas. I would like to first take you to the library where you can search for different resources here. There are several teachers' guides and websites, and you just can put in a search term and then click on the URL and it will take you to that resource or another website where you can explore their resources. To go back to the home page of NCCIE, you can just go up to the upper blue bar and click the logo, and it'll take you to the home page. Back to the Teaching Resource Center, the other area before I get onto the lesson plans is the videos library. Here, some of the communities wanted to create videos, and so NCCIE collaborated with them and supported them in that work. And we've got videos in all of these different subjects, and you just click on one and it'll take you to those videos. On each page, you'll see the video, a short description of the video, an acknowledgement protocol that we ask you to read before watching the video, some of the intended audiences for the video, the creative team who is involved in creating the video, and the length of it. And all of the resources, all these videos are short enough that you can share in each of your classrooms. If you have any questions about a specific video, you can connect with a regional lead who was involved in supporting that project with the community. There are over 80 resources, 80 lesson plans and over 40 videos in the Teaching Resource Center, and all are easily accessible through a number of ways. Here on the landing page, you'll see these shortcuts to 14 of the many subjects that you can search on. So there are way more than 14 subjects, but if you wanted to click on one of these, it's a shortcut that will take you to the results page for that specific subject. You can also type in a word here in the search field, or you can click on this advanced search button or this advanced search button, and it will take you to the advanced search page where you can, again, just simply type in a word or click on a box if you're interested in a specific learning level, in a specific subject, and you can see that there are way more than 14, any of the provinces or territories, and several other search terms that you can choose from. So let's say I want to know what resources are available from Ontario that were created in Ontario. So you just click that and the results should show up. But if not, you can just click the magnifying icon and you'll see that you're gonna get all of the resources that were created in Ontario. And you can see that there are several and several different subjects. So on this results page, you'll see the title, the subject, if there are any related subjects. Over here is the subject here, the grade, and maybe other grades that it might, or learning levels that might be connected to that could be connected to this lesson plan, and the approximate length of the lesson plan. So let's just click on one and we'll go into it in a little bit more depth. I first want to discuss with you or share with you how these lesson plans on nccie.ca have been created with an Indigenous lens. We've taken a holistic approach to developing these lesson plans, and that being the acknowledgement of all our relations, which include plants and animals, other human beings, the water, land, wind, sun, moon, stars, and more, everything seen and unseen. And so what we try to show here on this part of the lesson plan page is how this lesson plan connects with any of these elements. So in this particular lesson plan about the seasons, you can see that a connection has been made with the land and that there's an outdoor learning experience tied to this lesson. You can learn, there's a language and culture component. Elders or knowledge holders are involved in this lesson plan. Ethics in the classroom are practiced, and you can explore that here by clicking See More, understand how this lesson connects with the ethics in the classroom. Also, connections are made with different learning styles, giving attention to students' mind, body, and spirit in their learning journey. Connections are made with everyday life. There are participatory and experiential learning activities in this lesson. There's a connection made to help develop a healthy relationship with self and one's identity. And reflection time, personal reflection time, is available to connect with one's thoughts and feelings. And again, if you click the See More, you can find out a little bit more information from the creators of the lesson plan on how each of these components are connected in this lesson plan. So you've got the description, you've got the origin of this lesson plan, the main subject, other subjects that are connected, the learning level and other learning levels that might be connected that can be given this lesson plan, and also other resources on NCCIE, such as 4 other lesson plans that have something to do with trees, nature, maple syrup, and more, and also a video that I'll show you in a little bit. Another aspect to this lesson plan that makes it Indigenous is that we've included an acknowledgement protocol that we ask that you read before giving the lesson. And we ask you to, if you are not from the territory where this lesson plan was created, think about what a land acknowledgement is where you live. The contributors to this lesson plan are right here. The learning outcomes and background foundational information for the teacher. So it could be as short as 1 paragraph or a few paragraphs. And the idea behind creating these lesson plans and putting them on the website is that to allow teachers to be able to deliver the lesson plan directly from their laptop or desktop computer. And all of the resources, what we've tried to do is provide all of the resources right here at your fingertips with an easy click of your mouse. So in addition to the foundational information, all of the activities are shared. There's a paragraph on assessment, which not only might provide insight into a conventional assessment method, but gives thought to what an Indigenous approach to assessment might be. And then what other resources are out there on nccie.ca that's related to this lesson plan, but also elsewhere on the World Wide Web. And you can just click on the link, and that link will open up in a different page and you will be taken to that resource. This, the related resource here that's on nccie.ca are the maple sugar videos that have been created specifically for these 5 lesson plans on the seasons and maple syrup. So in this particular lesson plan, before I get to that, you'll see the activities are laid out for you with a purpose, the approximate time, what the activity instructions are, and the materials that are associated with this particular activity. So here is where you can get to the link for the video. But I just wanted to share with you one other aspect of how this lesson plan has been created with an Indigenous lens. We've asked the creators to give specific thought to how this activity is designed to connect with learners with different learning styles, and then provide that information to you as the instructor so that you can just go and explore and read how this lesson plan or this particular activity connects with physical learners, intellectual learners, emotional learners, and there's a little bit more information here. And that's given in each of the different activities. So this one it connects with all 4 different kinds of learners. And then activating prior knowledge. Again, the resources are right here at your fingertips. There's a video that you just can click on and it'll take you to, or a link that you can click on to connect you to this video that shows sweet water collecting in a bucket. And you, as an educator, we're asking you to look for pictures of sugar maple trees corresponding to each season. And then in the fourth activity, you've got all the information you need for that activity as well. But in the very first activity on seasonal trees, one of the activities is to watch a video that was created specifically for these lesson plans on maple sugar. And it takes you with that link directly to that page where you can find that video. And I'll just play for you a little bit, but you can see the 5 videos specifically created. This is the first one. If you want to go to another one, you can click on this link and just click on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th. The total number of all videos is right here. You can just connect to each of those lesson plans directly from this video that it is connected to. Again, here's the acknowledgement protocol we ask that you read before watching the video, and all of the creators and the creative team involved in putting this video together. So I'll just play for you a little bit of the video. And here you hear Doug Williams giving an introduction to the video and what he's going to talk about. And this video is 11 minutes, 41 seconds.
Here, my name is Nccie in the language, and my English name is Doug Williams. I'm from Curve Lake First Nation, and my clan is a Pike clan. From the early times, we knew how to do sap through a couple of stories that we've retained over time.
So he shares with you those stories. So this lesson plan, again, you can deliver it right from your desktop, or you can download it by clicking on one of these buttons. This is just the lesson plan, but if you want the resources downloaded as well, such as the handouts, the links to videos, you can click the second button. And what we ask that you do is just fill out this quick survey so we know if you're part of a school or organization, what its name is, if you're homeschooling, where you are with a First Nation or a town, what province or territory, what is your role, what learning level you're interested in, and if you have any other feedback for improving the website. And you submit, and then you close. So when you click on it, it will download here, and then you open it up into a PDF, and you can print it off and mark it up. You can make changes to it, as long as you recognize and acknowledge the origin of the lesson plan when you deliver it to your students. And if you are adapting it to where you live, we encourage you again to connect with people in your community who are from your territory and ask them for develop a relationship and build that relationship so you can develop this resource, adapt it to where you are. If you want to do a new lesson plan search, you just click that and it takes you to the advanced search page again. You might just want to click clear search before you do another search or in between your searches, and have fun exploring all of the lesson plans that nccie.ca has created for you. We hope you have enjoyed this tour, and it has given you a bit more insight into how to navigate the Teaching Resource Center. I hope that this has given you a bit more insight into how to navigate the website and arrive at the Teaching Resource Center, and how to find lesson plans and videos, and that you're able to use them in your classroom learning experiences. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
To recap this first chapter, we began with Shirley Williams opening the Teacher's Resource Guide in a good way with an opening prayer. She spoke in her language, Anishinaabemowin, because it is said in her culture that you need to talk to the spirits in the language. Next, the creators of this virtual resource guide, Don McCaskill, Kevin Fitzmaurice, and I, introduced ourselves, and then I gave an overview of the guide. After these introductions, Mark DOCKSTATOR, then president at First Nations University, provided viewers with a grounding in the history of the NCCIE project, its logo, and its work across the country. Mark shared that language and culture are foundational concepts within Indigenous education. Following Mark, Nicole Bell talked about the difference between adding in Indigenous content into the curriculum and infusing Indigenous education into the classroom. I've heard her describe these differences, with the first one, adding in, described as a fancy coffee with 3 layers, where each one is distinct, versus a steep tea, where you can't tell where the water ends and the tea begins. She acknowledged the discomfort that teachers that are new to Indigenous education may feel, and she encouraged everyone to sit with that discomfort in order to learn. Finally, Jennifer DOCKSTATOR gave a tour to navigate the NCCIE website. She highlighted the lesson plans and the videos in the Teaching Resource Center, which is where you can find all of the lesson plans and videos in this guide. In Chapter 2, Indigenous educators introduce us to the medicine wheel and its application for learning, for lesson planning, and for coursework for students. You'll notice right away that these wheels are similar and yet different, because they came from different teachers and different places. Don't let the differences distract you, but pay attention to their applications. Nicole Bell returns with a medicine wheel that she received from Cree and Anishinaabe teachers. She employs the medicine wheel to talk about the 4-direction model and its application for lesson planning. Next, Dean Smith from the Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board and his colleague, Elder Melody Crow, from Alderville First Nation, use a local Anishinaabe medicine wheel that looks slightly different from the one that Nicole shares with us. Dean and Melody take us through the ways that they use this medicine wheel as a reflection tool to structure learning with an Indigenous lens within the school board and for its teachers and learners.